It's always good in the late afternoon to have a shush moment. Welcome to the Smithsonian Institution and the Smithsonian Castle on the Mall for what promises to be a very engaging session today. I just want to remind people where you are. This is the Smithsonian Institution, not Institute. This is the first building built on the mall, started in 1848 and finished in 1855. And where you're sitting today, as we're talking about cultural heritage and the preservation of cultural heritage, it might be instructive to note that exactly where you're sitting is where 100 years ago, this flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, was in this room and was being repaired so it could be enjoyed by generations of Americans forever. So that's pretty cool. This session is a culmination of a two-day conference sponsored by the Department of State, led by the Department of State, hosted by the Smithsonian, and the Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee. That committee consists of a group of government agencies and organizations that came into being because of the Protect and Preserve International Cultural Property Act of 2016. And that act basically charged the US government with a kind of novel concept, like the government should actually collaborate and talk to itself and coordinate its efforts to preserve and protect cultural property in danger from human conflict, from natural disaster, from looting. And so, after 228 years of having the Republic, we finally got the FBI and the Department of Justice talking to the Department of Defense, talking to Homeland Security, talking to the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities. And basically the idea is, in this legislation, was the recognition of a problem. And if we remember to that time, we think about those disasters like ISIS's destruction in Iraq and Syria, Assad's barrel bombs in Aleppo. We think about the blowing up of Palmyra. And then we think about those natural disasters like the earthquake in Haiti that devastated its cultural heritage, the burning of manuscripts in Timbuktu, and so on. So this legislation was very important in terms of establishing a way that the people of the United States, the government of the United States, would take the lead, and the lead was designated to be the State Department, in bringing the government efforts together to actually do a job, an important job, in preventing the destruction of this heritage. So over the last two days, we've met. We've had various federal agencies and bodies focus on this, and it's been really a wondrous 2 days. We've also started to enlarge the circle because the legislation calls for collaboration with NGOs like the Blue Shield. It calls for collaboration with universities, with museums, with the private sector, with people in the art market and dealers, because this is a big enough problem that it's going to take all of us to deal with. Now, in terms of the effort to deal with the issue, we need a lot of help and we need a lot of support. And the great thing about this space in terms of dealing with people's heritage is I think Americans, I'm from New York, so when there's a disaster somewhere in the world, there could be floods in Bangladesh, and neighbors in New York will send a can of chicken soup to Bangladesh. Like, Bengalis are going to really drink that chicken soup? But people want to help. And whenever there's a thing, Americans are so helpful voluntaristically because they recognize, I believe, the dignity of all human beings. It's something our country stands for. So in many areas, when we think about cultural destruction or looting or depredation, it turns our stomach because we want to recognize the humanity of people who have a right to culture, a right to their language, to their beliefs, to their religion, to who they are. So this is very important, I think, from a human rights and a basic humanitarian stance that I think America is a really leading voice for. I think we also recognize that in culture is economy, civic life, industry, and so on. People make money out of culture. It's part of the economies. We have a cultural economy here in Washington, D.C. New York runs off of a cultural economy. Many places run off cultural economies, and it's important. So when we see the destruction of culture, we also see the lack of economic opportunities or the taking away of economic opportunities from people. And finally, there are people like me, scholars, anthropologists, that are in the dirt, that are in history, that love it for what it can teach us, for what this cultural heritage, these archaeological sites, museums, collections can teach us about history and humanity, where we've been and what inspiration we might draw from it. And of course, the subject today, which touches on all of those, touches on the humanitarian, the civic, economic, the intellectual engagement with cultural heritage, is the role of dealing with cultural heritage in our foreign policy of the United States. And so to lead the discussion, to lead a really stellar panel, we have the Assistant Secretary for Education and Cultural Affairs, Marie Rice. Assistant Secretary?
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, very much for those nice remarks. Good afternoon, everyone. How is everybody doing? Good? Okay, great. I hope you've had a great 2 days exchanging ideas on how best to protect our world's most precious items and heritage. And I'd like to thank all participating agencies for their support in making this symposium a real success. I need to give a special shout out to my team at the Cultural Heritage Center, especially Erin Concours. Erin, where are you? Erin, there you are. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Erin's been working on putting together this symposium together for months, so thank you. As chair of the Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee, the CHCC, I'm excited to be here today to discuss how cultural heritage can be leveraged as a tool in our nation's foreign policy. As our foreign policy changes, so do our methods and practices to preserve and to protect cultural heritage. Today, you'll hear from a distinguished panel on how they've applied those practices and tackled these issues at their posts abroad. We appreciate the essential value that preserving cultural heritage has, and it helps us understand our individual and our collective identity. It helps us remember who we are and where we come from. It promotes stability, economic development, and good, peaceful governance in our partner countries. As terrorists and criminal networks have looted and destroyed cultural heritage sites, as well as trafficked cultural heritage to finance their operations, we have come to appreciate the direct impact cultural heritage work has on our safety and our security. Today, you will hear some amazing stories on how cultural heritage is our legacy to humankind. Now, before I introduce our panel, I'd like to start with showing you some wonderful pictures from American photographer Tom Till, who is supported by the U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. His stunning photos from the ancient Silk Road in Central Asia illustrate how this treasured area is still bringing people and diverse cultures together. It also represents our joint commitment and efforts to address common challenges faced by the United States and the 5 Central Asian states. Aren't these photos absolutely beautiful? They're amazing. Tom, is he here? If not, we should still applaud him. That's what I think. Yay, thank you. Now, before I move on to our panelists, I'd like to briefly touch on our good work in the Western Hemisphere and Africa, since we do not have representatives from those regions here with us today. I hope these photos will help convey some of the impact generated by the hundreds, literally hundreds of cultural heritage programs and projects across both of those regions. Here are some classic period Maya cave paintings from the Petén region of Guatemala. Looting and trafficking of ancient objects are a major concern for Guatemala and for the Western Hemisphere. We've been working for a number of years with the governments of Guatemala, Colombia, and Peru. and others in the Western Hemisphere to preserve and protect their cultural heritage through a combination of cultural property treaties, training for law enforcement, and direct grants in support of conservation and protection. In Africa, South Africa, and Mozambique in particular, we are working with governments and their partners to combat the looting and trafficking of objects recovered from slave shipwrecks just off their shores. We're also learning about the similarities of the global slave trade and the human trafficking crisis today. And finally, I'd like to underscore something President Trump said at the 2017 Arab Islamic American Summit about cultural heritage. He said, "The Middle East is rich with natural beauty, vibrant cultures, and massive amounts of historic treasures. It should increasingly become one of the great global centers of commerce and opportunity." I agree with the president. The same could be said about all of the regions represented here today. And now, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists, all who have incredible experience in the field. Representing the East Asia Pacific region, our first panelist recently completed his assignment as the U.S. Ambassador to Thailand. He's had a long, illustrious career in the Foreign Service, serving at a variety of posts, including the United Kingdom, France, Australia, and Zaire, now known as the Congo, as well as service in Washington as a special representative of the United States Secretary of State for North Korea policy. Please welcome Ambassador Glenn Davies. Our second panelist is the current United States Ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Maureen Cormack, and she'll speak to the department's work in Europe. Ambassador Cormack has diverse experience, having served as the executive assistant in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter ISIL, and has worked in positions in the Bureau of International Programs and the Office of the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and for Public Affairs. Overseas, she served in the U.S. embassies in South Korea, Paris, and in Poland. Please welcome Ambassador Maureen Cormack. And our third panelist had just returned from her tour as the United States Ambassador to Nepal, where she took part in an epic effort to rebuild architectural treasures following the 2015 earthquake. But I let her tell you more about that. She will soon depart Washington, D.C. to assume her position as ambassador to Sri Lanka. She served in the State Department's Office of Policy, Right-Sizing, and Innovation, where she championed innovative ways to reform the department's bureaucracy and improve knowledge management and data use, and in positions covering South Central Asia, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. Please help me welcome Ambassador Ilana Teplitz. Thank you. And our fourth and final panelist is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. She most recently served as our United States Ambassador to Algeria and has deep experience in the Near East and North Africa region. In our Office of Egypt and Levant Affairs, and Office of Israel and Palestinian Affairs, as well as serving at the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli, Libya. Please welcome Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Joan Polashik. Thank you. Now, could I ask our panelists to please join me here up on the stage, and please take your seat. Thank you. No? Okay, from the back. Okay. Sorry about that. We've added a step in the back of the stage since yesterday, so that makes it easier. And now, okay, thank you so much.
I'm gonna hug you.
Okay, great. And now I'm just going to say I'm going to sit here and I'll turn to our first panelist, Glenn Davies, to share with us some more about cultural heritage projects in Thailand. Ambassador Davies, over to you. Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Royce, and thank you to everybody who is here, in particular Dr. Curran, who did us the great honor of coming out to Bangkok earlier this year to open up our exhibition that I'm going to say a little bit about today. But distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any ambassadors in the crowd, everybody, yeah, you get used to saying that when you address a group. Welcome to this incredible session. It's fantastic. This room is so inspiring. All this historic, or what's it called? The megafauna, charismatic megafauna that's up on the walls. Not to mention all you guys, but so great to share the podium with so many distinguished colleagues from the State Department. Now, my wife Jackie and I just came back about 3.5 weeks ago from 3 years in Bangkok, Thailand, representing the United States to the Kingdom of Thailand. And one of my greatest accomplishments there, I hope it will be recorded, was in fact to use cultural heritage to shape the narrative of shared history between the United States and Thailand. And I want to talk about two projects very quickly. One is the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, which we used to good effect. The other was a project we conceived and conducted out of Embassy Bangkok with lots of help from institutions here, principally the Smithsonian Institution, which was the bicentennial celebration of friendship between the United States and Thailand, this year being the 200th anniversary of the first recorded contact between America and the Kingdom, and that was called Great and Good Friends, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, why did we feel moved to do this? I mean, Bangkok is our largest embassy in Asia. It's our largest embassy in the world outside of a war zone. 49 agencies, 3,000 people. We do all kinds of things. We've got a huge military component, 8 law enforcement agencies. 1/5 of our people do health work on AIDS and Zika and malaria and all the rest of it. So why this deep dive? Why did we do this? Why get into cultural diplomacy? Because we had a need. We had a need at the dawn of the 21st century in Bangkok, the capital city of our only ally in Southeast Asia. At the dawn of the 21st century, Thailand was suffering from something familiar to all of us, which is they were having all kinds of challenges figuring out how to configure themselves, how to confront, how to deal with the challenges of the 21st century, and a new generation coming up which had no reason to think there's anything special about the relationship with the United States. China on the march, lots of pressures and challenges, and we wanted to find a way to recast the narrative of our relationship by telling a story or a series of stories. And I think the two projects that I'm going to talk about, our preservation of Wat Chai Wat Naram, which is one of the most beautiful temples, a 17th century temple in the capital, the old capital city of the Kingdom of Siam, Ayutthaya, number one, and number two, this project to celebrate 200 years of friendship. These were sort of our way of showing respect to the Kingdom, and I think we succeeded initially by getting some messages across to kitchen table Thailand, to the ordinary populace, and the king himself, the new king, the 10th king of the Chakri dynasty, came to open our exhibition, Great and Good Friends, to celebrate our friendship. So let me tell you a little bit about Thailand right now. It's the world's only military-run government, the only military junta on the planet today, I think, at least of any major country. It is this kingdom, this country in transition. In 2014, the military overthrew an elected civilian government. This coup triggered congressionally mandated sanctions, and that, along with some very strong public messaging from the previous administration, and I have to say, an Obama appointee twice over. He appointed me to the position of ambassador to Thailand, had begun to sour relations with the junta, the military leadership, and with the broader elites of Bangkok. And by the time I arrived in late 2015, 11 months after my predecessor, the sainted Christy Kenny, had left the job, things were going a little bit bad from a public diplomacy standpoint, and this jaundiced view of the ruling junta and the other elites of Bangkok had begun to seep into the public consciousness. So we wanted to find ways to get through to them with a new message about friendship between the United States and Thailand, and sort of here's what we did to appeal to not only the Bangkok elites, who are essential, but also the broader populace of this wonderful nation of 68 million people. Number one, we, through the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation, or AFCP, we're bureaucrats, we got acronyms for everything. We have, over the years, and we've accelerated the activity, looked for important cultural preservation projects to be involved with. Projects such as the preservation of Ramayana mural paintings in Bangkok, of Akka cultural traditions in the north, Islamic architectural heritage in the south. And these were working well over a period of years. The government liked them. Certainly the cultural bits of the government liked them, and the people liked them very much. They had a very high impact at the local level. Thai people visit these places, view these cultural icons of theirs, and of course about 1 million American tourists go there every year, and they have a chance to see what their government is doing to promote friendship between the two countries as well. The largest project in Thailand, the largest AFCP, Ambassadors Fund project in Thailand, is the ongoing work we're doing in the ancient capital of Ayutthaya, where we are preserving the 17th century temple complex, Chai Wat Naram Temple, in collaboration with the World Monuments Fund and the Thai Fine Arts Department. It's also a very popular site for Thais, just north of Bangkok, for those of you who've been there and perhaps gone to Ayutthaya. Now, severe flooding in 2011, I don't know if that's up. There we go. Is that, now this is not the, is this the flooding slide, or the, do we have the flooding slide, or we got to go back? You saw that already, probably, the flooding. 2011, the Mae Nam, the Chao Phraya River, had flooded a lot of the temple complex. In 2013, we gave the World Monuments Fund a little bit of money, and they began to document it, do surveys to restore 2 of the 8 towers at this iconic, very important temple. So that's the flooding. Now, next slide, which I think you've already seen. Our work basically dried up the temple, arrested, stopped the degradation of the temple, and it became kind of a model of cooperation between the United States and Thai conservation teams working together. Now, in a welcome coincidence, and this is what, luck is important to have, but I think you make your own luck, you make it happen. In a remarkable coincidence, if we can move on maybe to, I think, what is the next slide? Now along comes this wildly popular television program called Love Destiny. Bhupe Sawaniwat, the first female-driven plot, romantic comedy. It took off like wildfire in the kingdom. And guess who's the main character of the? I mean, there's the female who's the main character, but Wat Chai turns out to be the main character. They did a lot of their shooting there. Wat Chai becomes kind of a character in this thing, and all of a sudden, young Thai couples and Thais begin to show up there, renting period costumes to take selfies there, because this is where this thing is. This is where this thing is filmed. And of course, there's our prominent sign saying Uncle Sam, in collaboration with the Thai government and people, has been working to preserve Wat Chai. So it created sort of an opportunity for us to tell the story of how the United States of America respects and is willing to invest in preserving the cultural patrimony of the Kingdom of Thailand. Now, this was fascinating and fun, a lot of fun to do this thing, but the highlight of my time in Thailand was bringing this special exhibition of royal and presidential gifts exchanged between U.S. presidents and Thai kings over 200 years since the beginning of the relationship in 1818 to Thailand. And here, what's so great about being here in this wonderful castle, the headquarters of the Smithsonian Institution, is the Smithsonian was key to this. We wanted to tap the iconic collection of Siamese artifacts that the Smithsonian has had in its coffers since around the 1830s, one of the oldest collections of Asian artifacts that the Smithsonian has. And the Smithsonian, along with the Library of Congress, along with the National Archives, and 10 presidential libraries, all came on board for what I think was a bit of a unicorn in cultural diplomacy. The first time that this, concatenation of national level cultural historical institutions had sort of come together to help us out in gathering together the artifacts to put together this rare collection of exquisite gifts and historic documents to tell the story. Now, the story in brief, super quick: 1818, ship captain Stephen Williams, June of 1818, he's in a ship. It takes him a year to get to Thailand. He's coming to buy sugar because the War of 1812 dried up our sources of sugar in the Caribbean. And so they were going that far afield for this precious commodity. He sails up the Gulf of Thailand. America's this young, little new experimental country. There's this old established kingdom there to do a deal to buy some sugar. Gets conducted into the court of Rama II. This is very close to the dawn of the Jakri dynasty. And he hits pay dirt. He is conducted into the court of Rama II. He gets a great deal on some sugar, and he brings back to him a letter from the first minister to Rama II, to President James Monroe, which we found in the letters of James Monroe up on Capitol Hill at the Library of Congress, and we brought back, along with 76 other artifacts, to tell the story of the 10 generations, 2 centuries of our friendship. So the Great and Good Friends exhibition became the centerpiece of this year-long, still going on, bicentennial celebration of our friendship. We called it Great and Good Friends because that was the salutation that Abraham Lincoln used to address His Majesty King Rama IV in February 1862, when the famous elephant letter was sent by King Mongkut, the king from King and I fame, who offered Lincoln elephants, a mating pair of elephants, to improve the internal commerce of the United States. It's a wonderful story. It's such a cool story that Ken Burns, in his vaunted, iconic history of the Civil War, got totally wrong. Burns said, and it's right there on YouTube for you to check out, that this was an offer of war elephants. It was not. It was more beautiful than that. It was an offer of elephants to improve the internal commerce of the United States of America. Ken needs to do more fact-checking, I think, with his stuff. So we put this thing together. We involved the whole mission. I had the great good fortune, after 38 years of serving in the Foreign Service, starting at the very lowest rank and rising to the rank of ambassador, to find myself the first time in a mission that can get stuff done, with a public affairs counselor, Mindy Masanis, still with the State Department today, who is an organizational dynamo. She couldn't make it today because she's still a dynamo and she's got a day job and she's doing it. But she and her crew and the entire embassy got together to help us to do it, to try to reach a broad audience of Thai people with a message of friendship. The opening ceremony was remarkable. Here you see the king, the new king, the 10th king of the Chakri dynasty, King Maha Vajiralongkorn Bobintra Debiawarangun, who is sitting there, and I'm talking to him, and standing at attention next to me is the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Thailand. And this is the only event to date, this new king, who's been on the throne for over a year, the only bilateral diplomatic event he's ever participated in. He accepted to come to our to preside at our opening. We laid it on thick. We really pulled out all the stops. News about GGF appeared on the front page of this is the premier English language daily of Bangkok, and because it's the king, because it's a real live kingdom and the king has power, it was on every newspaper and on every television program all across the kingdom. He is the ultimate authority, commands a lot of attention and respect, and so that was important. Now, in the beginning, it was trade and commerce that brought us together. It was people-to-people contact. It wasn't bureaucrats, not governments, not diplomats. And in fact, bringing this exhibition to Thailand could only have happened if we had been able to cooperate, as we were able to, with companies, American companies and Thai companies. We raised about $4 million from the private sector. That enabled us to bring the story to everybody. Now you've got some illustrations, I can't really see them too well, but of people attending this exhibition in Bangkok. It went on for 3 months. We did it at the Grand Palace at the Queen's Circuit Museum of Textiles, and we created a huge media campaign around it. Huge media campaign. You saw actually, can we go back to the monks picture? I love the picture of the monks. The monks university came, and you're beginning to really penetrate and hit the ties where where they care, when you're able to attract monks to come to view the exhibition and learn about it, because there's such a repository of learning in the kingdom. We also engaged media. We did things that were traditional and non-traditional. We worked with media companies and movie theaters and restaurant chains and advertising companies, and we saturated kind of the airwaves and certainly the city of Bangkok with images of the exhibition, inviting everybody to come to see it. We did a video. Can we run that video? Is that possible to run?
ไทยส่วนเนี่ยเพื่อนผมรู้จักกันมานานตั้งแต่สมัยโบราณแลกเปลี่ยนแล้วก็แลกเปลี่ยนวัฒนธรรมไทยมีทูตที่นั่นอเมริกามีทูตที่นี่แลกเปลี่ยนรุ่งเรืองเฟื่องฟูช่วยเหลือแบ่งปัน200 ปีมาแล้วแต่เราก็ยังเป็นเพื่อนกันรักกันก้าวไปด้วยกันตลอดไปใช่โย200 ปีแห่งมิตรภาพระหว่างสหรัฐอเมริกากับไทยณพิพิธภัณฑ์ผ้าในสมเด็จพระนางเจ้าสิริกิติ์พระบรมราชินีนาถ
Yeah, so this thing played all over the kingdom. It played on every movie screen in 40 provinces. It played all over Bangkok. It played on the SkyTrain platform. It played on the big, huge, billboards. Everybody saw it. And the actors in that were people from the U.S. Embassy. And they were from all walks of diplomatic life. And they had a blast doing it. And it was a great morale thing to do all this. But our partnerships with the likes of 3M, Citi, Chevron, McDonald's, Google, we were able to kind of do this. And plus all these actors on the Bangkok scene. And my favorite example is McDonald's. I think we got this. There's the McDonald's branding. I went and met with a guy who runs McThai, which is McThai is the McDonald's franchise there, 260 restaurants, they're all over the kingdom. And he said to me, Ambassador, we print hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of paper placemats every week. He says, well, put your stuff on our stuff, our cups, our placemats. So you got little kids in far-flung provinces playing little games to get Captain Williams from Massachusetts to Thailand. We sort of, we were shameless in doing all that stuff. The other major partner was Google. Google was key, and Google was tough. Google's tough because Google has this natural reticence about dealing with the United States government. So we had to kind of, work on them and import-tune them and explain to them why this is good to do. The Google Cultural Institute in Paris finally came on board, and these guys are good. And they did everything. They did the Street View technology to create a 360 view tour of the exhibition that you can get on Google Maps. If you click on the Grand Palace, it'll come up. You can walk through it. They added us to Google Expeditions. There I am clowning around with Ben King, who runs Google Thailand. They were a fantastic accelerator who took it beyond the Bangkok Beltway out into the kingdom and, in fact, all over the world. We figured the value of all this branding from all these companies was probably worth about $4 million bucks. Now, what's more important to me, I love kind of saturating Bangkok with this, but what we really wanted to do was get the people all around the kingdom, which we succeeded in doing because as a result of our cooperation with Google, we're now conducting training workshops for youth and non-traditional audiences in the provinces on digital literacy. We've also repurposed the story of our 200-year relationship into a professionally produced package of English language tools for teachers throughout the country to use in their classrooms. We're going to do the same. We're generating the material now for use by social studies teachers in Thailand in the Thai language. So look, I'm going to stop pretty much with this, but I'll tell you the upshot after a 38-year career, 10 years of which was in the Cold War. Cultural diplomacy, cultural heritage is a powerful, powerful thing. I have to tell you, it always has been, from the days of sending Dave Brubeck around behind the Iron Curtain to today, when it's a little more challenging in a globalized world with all these cultures that we have to find ways to talk to and deal with. But it's so powerful, and I keep going back to Jacob Bernowski's, when I was a kid back in the 70s, he did a thing called The Ascent of Man, wrote a book, The Ascent of Man, and did a series. And there's one scene where, got to bear with me here, where he's doing it about World War II, and he walks into the swamps next to the crematoria at Auschwitz and Auschwitz, and he reaches down into the mud. He's wearing a suit and tie, and he reaches into the mud, and he lifts up the mud, and he says, you have to touch people. You have to touch people in order to prevent conflict from happening, in order to promote peace, stability, and security. And that's what this stuff is. It's not rocket science. It's just finding ways to get through to people, to show them our respect for their culture, to strike these mystic chords of memory, as that famous wordsmith Abraham Lincoln put it, to get them in their heart, as well as in their head. And that's what we were trying to do here. And we, in a way, I think, kind of rewrote the narrative a bit of the relationship between the United States and Thailand, told new stories about how it started, why it matters, why we should preserve it, protect it, advance that friendship, that relationship at a time when China's on the march in places like Southeast Asia, when young kids today, they know us as a brand, they love us, they love the Yankees caps, they love to go to McDonald's, but they have no reason to view the United States as anything other than a nice brand. So telling them these stories, preserving their heritage, protecting it, showing them that we respect them is a hugely, hugely powerful thing. It's worth 10 trade treaties. It's worth 10, visits by aircraft carriers. And it's lasting, and that's what I believe. So thank you so much for listening. I probably went over time, but that's kind of the story in a nutshell over the last 10 years of how we kind of did it in the Kingdom of Thailand. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
pleasure of being invited to speak for the 200 Years of Friendship at the Library of Congress for the Kingdom of Thailand and the United States. And I wanted to let you know that the Deputy Foreign Minister and everyone that was there deeply appreciated all the work we've done from a cultural standpoint. So I want to applaud you for your great work and for all the people that helped achieve this. And I think, Ambassador, your words are very important here today. And I just want to say one more time, let's give him a big round of applause. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Ambassador Cormack to the stage. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and wonderful colleagues. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today. I think it's always interesting to see the differences between similar programs conducted in very different parts of the world. So I will share a little bit of our experience in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a country that stands at the crossroads of history. Illyria during the Roman and Byzantine empires, Bosnia was first mentioned by name in the mid-10th century by Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. Modern history began in the 15th century with Bosnia and Herzegovina's conquest by the Ottoman Empire. Over 400 years later, the arrival of the Austro-Hungarian Empire began the country's conversion to the present era. The Balkan Wars of the early 1900s and World War I led to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and from the Balkan battles of World War II, Yugoslavia emerged and then disintegrated in the terrible wars of the 1990s. The United States played a leading role in helping to end the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina through the Dayton Peace Accords of December 1995. The people of the country continue to struggle with their legacy 23 years later, but among many accomplishments, the Dayton drafters had the wisdom to create the Commission to Preserve National Monuments. Our partnership with the Commission since the end of the war has helped restore cultural heritage sites across the country of untold value and has bolstered the Commission itself as an apolitical, interethnic body to rebuild the country. Bosnia and Herzegovina, known in that cryptic shorthand that we talk about as BIH, has been fortunate to receive support through the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation for 20 projects to help it reclaim its long and storied history. All of these have been small grants, with the exception of the National Museum project I will discuss, but many of our projects, if not most, have had a significant multiplier effect, attracting funding from others in the international community. And more importantly, our AFCP grants have on occasion inspired local governments to take responsibility themselves for the preservation of their shared cultural heritage. I will walk you through only 3 of our 20 projects to give you an illustration of how we used 3 very different grants to accomplish our foreign policy goals. The Ferhadia Mosque in Bosnia and Herzegovina's second largest city, Banja Luka, the capital of the Republika Srpska, is named for Ferhad Pasha Sokolović, who in 1566 was appointed the Ottoman chieftain, or bey, over the principality that had Banja Luka as its seat. He was responsible for numerous building projects across the region, including this mosque, built during the Ottoman Empire's 16th century ascendancy. Its architectural style differs slightly from the usual Istanbul style, and it was famous outside of Bosnia for its exquisite floral motifs inside and out. During the 1990s war, Ferhadia and other city mosques in Banja Luka and much of Republika Srpska were not only razed to the ground, evidence of their existence was erased from the city's master plan. The rubble left from the explosion of this mosque was removed from the site and scattered in some of the same sites as mass graves, including in the Vrbas River. The actual site of the mosque was paved over and turned into a parking lot. A 2001 first attempt to rebuild the mosque erupted into a violent demonstration. In 2007, the embassy awarded a small grant to this Commission to Preserve National Monuments, exclusively for the purpose of identifying as many stones and fragments as possible and documenting them as reminders of a building that once was. This had a multiplier effect that few anticipated at the time. Other donors stepped forward notably the governments of Turkey and of the Republika Srpska, took the project to a completely new level and funded the reconstruction of the mosque for the community. This project had unambiguous meaning for the war-torn community in Banja Luka, that justice and human rights would prevail over war crimes and the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. It offered encouragement to refugees that they could return and regain their basic human rights, and it affirmed the importance of their identity for the survival of the local community. The official opening of the mosque on May 7th, 2016, was an extraordinary stepping stone toward the renewal of civic trust and reconciliation. The Old Jewish Cemetery in Sarajevo is the second largest Jewish sepulchral complex in Europe, after the one in Prague. Sephardic Jews began coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 16th century after their expulsion from the Iberian Peninsula, and they numbered around 2,000 at the time of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, after which Ashkenazi Jews added to the population, so that by World War II there were about 10,000 Jews in Sarajevo. Now there are only about 700. Besides being of vital ancestral and religious value, the cemetery contains a record of the Jewish people in Bosnia and Herzegovina from the 16th century right up to the closing of the burial site in 1965. The style of the tombstones, motifs, and epitaphs reveals traditions and features of life unique to the Jewish community in Sarajevo, blending Sephardi and Ashkenazi traditions with local culture. The monuments built after World War II also identify victims of the Holocaust and are of utmost importance for both the Jewish and the wider communities. Over time, the cemetery suffered the usual ravages of time and neglect, but the most harm was done during the 92 to 95 siege of Sarajevo, where the cemetery was on the front lines of the war. Approximately 90% of the nearly 800 tombstones were damaged by gunfire or explosions or toppled by snipers to cobble together hiding places. Drawing again on the Ambassadors Fund, the embassy helped a local organization restore the cemetery's stone masonry gate and document and conserve hundreds of historic tombstones. Prominently located on a hillside overlooking the city center, the cemetery has long been a point of pride for Sarajevans, including non-Jewish citizens. It endures today as one of the most vivid testimonials to the ethnic and religious tolerance for which Sarajevo has been known for centuries. And last but far from least, I want to talk about the National Museum of Sarajevo, located in the heart of the city, and it was once a world-class cultural and scientific institution. Built during the Austro-Hungarian Empire to preserve the history of the entire Balkan region, it opened in 1913. The museum complex itself is a cultural monument. The building, construction, methodology, and aesthetics are typical of the 19th century Western European ideal and reflect the high-quality engineering of that period. The war of the 1990s also took its toll on the museum. It incurred significant damage from shelling, which damaged the roof and more than 300 of its windows. Of the museum's 3 million objects, its most renowned and valuable is the Sarajevo Haggadah, an illuminated manuscript that dates to around 1350 and contains the traditional text of the Passover Haggadah, which accompanies the Passover Seder. Historians believe it was carried to Sarajevo after Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the Jews from Spain in 1492. This priceless and storied artifact is continued a symbol of Sarajevo's multiculturalism and spirit of survival, having been saved from destruction during World War I, World War II, and the siege of the 1990s by ordinary citizens. In 2002, the Haggadah returned to the National Museum and is housed in a state-of-the-art display room that was funded through an initial grant from the Ambassadors Fund, which led to major support just years later from the Louvre and from UNESCO. The Dayton Peace Accords, however, did not create a state-level entity to oversee the administration of the museum, and so caught in the middle of political disputes, stymied by operational hurdles, and without the means of funding salaries and operational costs, the museum closed in January of 2012. I arrived in Sarajevo in January of 2015, right across the street from the museum, with a giant X over the door that I had to look at all day long. Recognizing the potential of the National Museum as a dual symbol of unity and cultural and national diversity, our embassy in Sarajevo fought successfully to reopen the museum in 2015. And our public affairs officer, who did most of the fighting for us, Stephanie Altman-Winans, is with us today. I'm very happy to have her here. The Ambassadors Fund came in behind us with a major grant to support key aspects, including much-needed security improvements, a new roof over the Archaeology and National Science Building, and the conservation of that building's historic windows, doors, and interior wall paintings. Soon after, the Smithsonian joined us to assess the museum's vast collections and assist the staff in mapping a way forward. And we are most grateful for that support and for Aviva Rosenthal's leadership of the team that came out to see us. I don't see Aviva. Importantly, our leadership and contributions led to the formation of a U.S. Embassy-facilitated National Museum Coordination Group, international and local partners working together now to both assist the revitalization of the museum and to advocate for a resolution of the institution's ambiguous legal status, an ongoing challenge. We are now joined by UNESCO, the French, Italian, Turkish, and Austrian embassies to come together and support capital projects, much-needed training, and we are also joined by local business leaders that have begun to use US-style corporate models of social responsibility and philanthropy to finally have a positive impact on the museum and its business models. Since the start of our engagement, the museum has shown great resiliency, increasing visitor numbers every year to almost 100,000 now, and showing a visible uptick in activities that include the first Nights at the Museum in the Balkans. Bosnia and Herzegovina public stops me on the streets to thank me for opening their most important cultural property, and they have reclaimed their museum by visiting in droves to learn about the country's shared history and heritage. In closing, I would love to have more time to talk to you about the beauty and the importance of all of the AFCP projects that we have had, and we would like to express our thanks to ECA and Assistant Secretary Royce and all your predecessors for that support. I think these examples illustrate the critical importance of the cultural space in driving our foreign policy goals in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For us, their effect as a catalyst has also been extraordinary, inspiring other organizations and countries to add very significant donations to ours. And the preservation of shared cultural heritage serves as a permanent reminder of the US and Bosnian conviction that the different ethnicities in Bosnia and Herzegovina have a shared past filled with traditions of mutual tolerance and respect that will lead to a shared future. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Cormack, I just want to say thank you for your leadership. That was truly outstanding, and I want to say thanks to also the embassy participants such as Stephanie and others in Rosenthal. And I also want to say that these were just 3 examples of the 20 projects. So again, let's give her a big round of applause for what they've done. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now at this point, I'd like to call Ambassador Alana Teplitz to the stage. And she is, I'll move out of the way here. And she, as a reminder, she just recently served in Nepal, which is really amazing, and now is going on to Sri Lanka. Ambassador, after you.
Thank you very much. To colleagues, everybody gathered here in the audience, I offer you sort of the bottom line up front about cultural preservation, and that is that it's a very smart investment for the United States. For relatively small sums of money, despite all of the grand projects my colleagues have talked about and I'll talk about, we really get a lot of bang for our buck in return. And we have an opportunity to display our values and show the quality of our friendships and partnerships in a way that is very unique, and I think, as you've heard, very welcome by our host nations. These investments also distinguish us from others who operate in the cultural space. And perhaps in Nepal, we had some of the most vivid examples of this recently. I want to talk about one of the major projects there, which was the restoration of the Gadi Baitak Palace. This was the place in Nepal that had been built at the turn of the 20th century by the Rana regime at the time. It's where the king greeted foreigners, and it really has this anchoring effect on the main Kathmandu Durbar Square. It was heavily damaged in the 2015 earthquake. We were able to commit funds to help restore it, and in contrast to some of the other preservation work happening funded by other countries right next door, we were able to do so in a way that was highly culturally sensitive. We employed local workmen. We were able to use traditional techniques. We were also able to convey the quality of this effort in a way that I think was unique. And I don't think we have any of the videos, but we posted several on YouTube in Nepali, done by my public affairs team and others, climbing all over this monument as it was under reconstruction to show how this really mattered to the people of Nepal and how we took their thoughts and the community's thoughts into account as we worked on this. As the year-long effort went forward, of course, the neighboring efforts were also underway. We were able to document some of the signage that was put forward. Ours was in English in Nepal. Everything else was in Chinese. And it really showed, again, sort of the value we placed on that partnership and the character of that partnership. It was a great visual display of how that worked. You know, you can see that this was a very elaborate building, and even I think for the Nepalis, it was a little bit of a lost art because it was not their typical heritage. It's not what you think of when you see a European-style structure in Nepal, but it was very important to them culturally. With the completion of the work there, again, using local craftsmen, again, using local engineers, we were able to produce something that would be seismically resilient for the future, which is a major concern, I think, for Nepal as it looks at preserving its heritage. So we were able to blaze that trail, try out techniques, so this will have a force multiplier, but also create something that can now be much more accessible to Nepalis in general. This was a royal palace, and so it was, there's me looking up during the work, a royal palace that wasn't very accessible to the public, and through this effort, it became very accessible to them. It was inaugurated in, I think it was May of this year. The Prime Minister came out, was very publicly thankful, and as Glenn had relayed, the fact that he was present, I think, really showed that this was something of a tremendous value that we were giving back to the public. We also made a point, as we have looked at a whole number of projects, and Nepal was the single largest country recipient of AFCP projects, 22, I think, over the many years, to look at how we could be investing in heritage, not only to preserve it for its own sake, but also to help anchor some of the tourism and other economic activity that would be happening across the country. In that way, we were able to build a narrative, a true and legitimate narrative that said this is not just about our respect, although that is fundamentally, you know, the key pillar of this programming. This is also about development, and it's also about helping you build your economy in a way that can showcase the unique heritage that you bring to the table. So I think that when we look at these projects and consider the very modest sums of money that go into them, whether it's preserving a small collection, helping restore a building or components of a building, the meaning really goes much deeper, the impact goes much deeper than the price tag might actually allow. And in that sense is where you really get that big return on investment. I had a chance also in Nepal to trek up to the north in the province of Mustang to visit some of our heritage up there. That is another area that's very isolated geographically. We walked a long way to get to, at high altitude to get to some of these projects, but again, is under a lot of pressure also from neighbors interested in revising the cultural narrative. I think that's an added element of our cultural preservation, and we certainly heard that from Maureen's presentation. That's also a significant feature of the preservation efforts in Sri Lanka. I've got a twofer. I'm also an ambassador to Maldives. There's a little bit of work going on there, but in Sri Lanka, there has been an effort really to make sure that we are helping to recognize and preserve the multi-ethnic dimension of that country. As you may be aware, there was a very long conflict, 30 years there, still an enormous amount of tension between those ethnic groups, and of course a very long and fraught colonial history. There have been 13 projects there, or 15 projects, sorry, over the last 13 years in Sri Lanka and Maldives. And they have run the gamut, across that whole spectrum of history and ethnic relations. So it has been Buddhist temples, a Dutch fort, Hindu collections of archaeological artifacts, and documenting some of the intangible heritage of the island that I think is very important, again, for that ethnic diversity, and making sure that we are kind of touching on each one of these communities in turn, so that we are not favoring any one group, and trying to, I think, display an ecumenical approach to culture and nation building and nationhood that reflects some of our own values. Just on October 16, so just last month, our chargé, Bob Hilton, helped inaugurate with the Prime Minister a stupa that had been conserved in Rajagala. It's a mountaintop site. This stupa is in the remains of a 2,000-year-old Buddhist forest monastery. So I think you're hearing today also that the spectrum of these projects is enormous. Everything from dance to museums to temples, from a huge array of cultural histories and a huge array of sort of historic connotations. This particular project in Sri Lanka also focuses on walkways, common buildings, places with paintings. So the preservation works are not just, I think, on the obvious. Maureen talked about the doors and the windows, and I think that's important to understand as well, that sometimes preserving heritage means doing the things that are not very sexy or flashy, but are going to make these monuments sustainable into the future. I think that is deeply appreciated by the people who find these places to be special, who revere these places or are charged with preserving them but have few resources to do that. And I think that, again, multiplies the impact of our efforts. Just to cap off my remarks, I want to say that this, in Nepal in particular, was probably the biggest generator of goodwill that we had in a country where we already had a huge reservoir of goodwill, where Peace Corps had been there for 50 years, where our aid program had been there for 65, where Americans and Nepalis really like one another, so everything was good, which I greatly enjoyed. But the fact that we took the time, the money, and the effort to restore these spaces, and I just showed you, one very small but significant project. People across the country knew about these efforts. Of course, we amplified them through social media and made sure that the narrative was out there. But even without doing that, they had heard. Local press picked it up, others picked it up, political figures picked it up. And because we had touched on, I think, this issue of dignity and respect, and the fact that the partnership we wanted with Nepal needed to be very genuine, the preservation efforts were a tangible demonstration of that. So back to that bottom line up front. For very small investment, we reap huge foreign policy dividends, certainly in very difficult environments, but even in those environments where you'd think we had already built that long relationship, there's always an opportunity to renew that connection and show that the respect is a two-way street. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Ambassador Teplitz. In the ECA Bureau, we talk a lot about impact. And look what she's been able to do, she and the embassy team. And in Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Maldives, and the thousands and thousands of people that you've impacted for now and to the future. So again, one more time, let's give her a big round of applause. And now I'd like to invite Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Joan Polashek, got to say it right here. I want to invite you up to the stage. She's in charge of Near Eastern affairs, and as I described in her bio, she's got an incredible amount of experience in this subject. So thanks, Ambassador.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, and I'd like to second the thanks to Dr. Curran and Assistant Secretary Rice, and of course to the Smithsonian and the Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee for hosting this gathering. As you can imagine, the Middle East and North Africa is a region that is fraught in many ways. You know, lots of conflict, lots of tension, lots of really high stakes national security issues. And what's very interesting to me as I listen to the perspectives from other parts of the world is that there was a real focus on soft power and showing respect. And of course, in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau, we also like soft power. We also think it's important to show respect. But I think that there's also a harder edge to these programs that we can effectively deploy to advance our national security interests. So that's what I'd like to talk about with you all today. In our view in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau, it's very clear that cultural heritage is a powerful tool. The protection of cultural heritage plays an important role in our foreign policy and is linked to our national security. The Near Eastern Affairs Bureau sees counterterrorism, security, economic, and social value in supporting our regional efforts to protect their cultural heritage. I'll start with a very practical, concrete illustration. The looting and sale of cultural property provides ISIS, other violent extremist organizations, militias, and criminal enterprises with a cash stream that funds their activities. The trafficking process itself provides a mechanism for laundering stolen or extorted funds. Looted artifacts have also been bartered for goods, services, favors, and weapons. Documents captured in the 2015 coalition raid on the Abu Sayyaf compound in Syria revealed that ISIS had a highly developed bureaucratic structure to promote and administer the looting and trafficking of antiquities. Its Antiquities Division issued stamped permits authorizing looters to dig up artifacts in ISIS-controlled territory, detained any looter operating without ISIS approval, and collected a 20% charge on the sale of antiquities. The precise amount raised in this clandestine trade is unknown. Though dwarfed by the $1 billion we believe ISIS raised from oil and other sources in its peak year of 2014, the sale of antiquities is significant for the long-term financing of ISIS. Some artifacts looted by ISIS from Syria and Iraq have trickled onto the antiquities market, but most, especially costly pieces, seem to have been warehoused to await favorable market conditions and the cultivation of high-end buyers. ISIS's looting and trafficking networks have survived the destruction of the Islamic State, and unless we find ways to keep these artifacts off the markets, these storied artifacts may well provide ISIS with a steady funding stream to finance violent attacks for years to come. While terrorist finances provide a clear and threatening connection between the destruction of cultural heritage and national security, there's also a positive side, as some of our colleagues have noted, to the economics of cultural heritage protection. In some countries, cultural heritage conservation provides a foundation for increased tourism, job opportunities, and economic growth, all key elements of our policy priorities in our region, to help strengthen the economic potential of our partner countries, which advances our own economic interests as well. And where security and stability have grown, in Morocco, for example, the development of heritage sites and museums as tourist attractions is seen as a vitally important income generator. Ultimately, however, there's much more than money in play. Protecting cultural heritage has individual, community, and national benefits. Protecting cultural heritage promotes social inclusion and discourages radicalization to violent extremism. Individuals who are grounded in their own heritage are less likely to seek identity and belonging in a terrorist group, as they are less vulnerable to terrorist empty ideology that preys on societies marginalized and disenfranchised. The notion of positive agency through protecting cultural heritage can foster stability by providing a safe focus for cooperative, community-based activities that promote reconciliation. As Libyan ambassador to the United States, Wafa Bouguegas, has noted, even in the midst of the civil conflict that divided her country, Libya's Antiquities Department has remained unified and able to operate throughout Libya because Libyans believe in their hearts that their millennia of common heritage transcend their modern political divisions. That's pretty powerful. In Iraq, appreciation for that country's rich cultural heritage is critical to the emergence of a unified national identity, which in turn is critical to our efforts to secure the lasting defeat of ISIS. For example, the Iraqi Institute for the Conservation of Antiquities and Heritage in Erbil provides a welcoming venue for Iraqis of all backgrounds to work together on cultural heritage protection and preservation. Started in 2008 with support from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, the Institute enjoys enthusiastic participation and support from the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government, Arabs and Kurds, Sunni and Shia, Yazidi and Shabak, Muslims and Christians, and men and women. Their shared appreciation of Iraq's cultural heritage highlights the space where national identity is rooted. Since 2003, in other parts of war-torn Iraq, the U.S. Embassy has partnered with the Iraqi government to rehabilitate the Iraqi Museum in Baghdad, to stabilize and preserve endangered structures at the ancient city of Babylon, and draw up a management plan for that site. Another project addressed emergency stabilization and conservation in the ancient city of Nimrud. And in coming weeks, the State Department, in coordination with national, provincial, and local stakeholders, will launch a $2 million project to support the restoration of sites in northern Iraq that are significant to minority communities and were targeted for destruction by ISIS and other terrorist groups. Did I just mess up the slides? Okay. Since 2014, the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs and Education and Cultural Affairs have been working together to draw international attention to the growing terrorist and criminal threat to cultural heritage in the region, particularly in countries racked by violence and instability. NEA provided funding to the American Schools of Oriental Research, ASOR, a US-based academic organization devoted to the study of the ancient and modern cultures of the Near East. The project monitors and documents the damage being done to cultural heritage by violent extremists and other parties in the conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Libya, and strengthens local capacity to safeguard that cultural heritage. ASOR scholars are now collaborating with local heritage experts to identify immediate protection and stabilization requirements in areas newly liberated from terrorist control. Unfortunately, in parts of the Middle East and North Africa, administrative shortcomings, instability, and/or conflict have created conditions conducive to the looting of archaeological sites and theft of cultural property, in some cases beyond the capacity of resource-challenged ministries charged with protecting cultural heritage. These unfortunate changes in the region prompted the U.S. to take a closer look at our own policies and what more we could do to stem this illegal trade, given our policy imperatives and the fact that we have been a major market for antiquities. While the U.S. has a long history of blocking the importation of looted cultural property through bilateral memoranda of understanding based on the 1970 UNESCO Convention on Cultural Property, we only recently began deploying this tool in the Middle East and North Africa. As many of you know, these MOUs authorize the Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection to seize undocumented cultural property if it left its source country after the date of the MOU, placing the burden on the importers of antiquities in the U.S. to show proof of legal sale from the country of origin. One example of this success is with Egypt, whose spectacular heritage has long been ravaged by grave robbers. Egypt suffered a sharp increase in looting after the turmoil and disturbances of 2011. The Egyptian government decided to commit resources to cultural heritage protection And in November 2016, Egypt became the first MENA country to sign such an MOU. 3 months later, Egyptian Minister Plenipotentiary Al-Dasuki Yusuf said this about the MOU's immediate benefit. For years, I have been calling Sotheby's and Christie's and saying, that object on the cover of your catalog was stolen from my country. And they would say, can you prove it? Now, I call them and they say, that object was stolen in my country and you have to prove that it wasn't. And they say, yes, sir. Our experience with the Egyptian MOU highlighted the fact that the statutory requirements for an MOU are strict and complex. So last year, the State Department began a program of partnership to advise Middle Eastern countries that seek our help in preparing their MOU request packages. A decade of ECA and NEA training and capacity building for Libyan archaeologists and law enforcement personnel laid the groundwork for signing an MOU with Libya in February 2018. Today, we are working with 5 more Middle Eastern and North African countries on MOUs that will strengthen the ability to combat looting and theft from cultural sites in those countries. In closing, I'd like to offer these thoughts on cultural heritage, national security, and U.S. foreign policy. Cultural heritage is made up of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are as human beings, as communities, and as nations. It tells us where we came from and where we belong. The artifacts of cultural heritage are the tangible symbols of those stories. Shared cultural heritage affirms our collective identity and binds people together into communities. Respect for the cultural heritage of other communities and pride in heritage shared by all provides the basis for multi-ethnic societies. Cultural heritage, quite simply, is the glue that holds nations together, and destroying it makes the world a more dangerous place, whereas protecting it enhances security, stability, and economic opportunity, all of which are vital elements of our national interest in the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you.
I have to say, Ambassador Vlasic, I really appreciate what you shared today. One of the first things that happened when I came into the Bureau was we had just signed the MOU for Libya, but to hear your many examples and what powers they have and how important they are really is a testament to ECA's work and your work and to everyone here at the U.S. Department of State and to everyone here who cares about these things. So thank you again. One more round of applause. Well, now the good part of the program is here. They've given me the opportunity to let you ask questions and they'll provide answers. But if no one asks questions, I'll ask them questions. So I'll give you the first opportunity to ask questions before I do that to see. And we've got some handheld mics in the room. So if you've got a handheld mic, right? Where are our mics? Okay, perfect. So would anyone like to ask a question? This incredible, distinguished panelist group? Yes, would you like to come up? And if you could stand up, please, and say your name and address the ambassador or ambassadors.
This is really just a general question for anyone on the panel. You talked about MOUs and their effect on trade. Under the Bush administration, the U.S. facilitated lawful trade by requiring countries, as a condition of any MOU, that they would allow for export permits to be issued. The Obama administration moved away from that, and I'm wondering if the Trump administration is going to go back to a more trade-friendly approach, given its pro-business views.
Anyone want to ask? Okay, Ambassador Teplis, did you want to answer that?
For me?
Basically addressed to all of you, to everyone here on the panel.
Yes.
I would let me just say something, just as the Assistant Secretary. I would say that a lot of the work around these MOUs are very technical, a lot of decisions that are made, but we also do the overlay of the political aspect as well. So there's a lot of components to that. But if the ambassadors would like to share a little bit of their
Well,
view.
if I could just clarify, you're looking at a question about trade writ large or trade in cultural antiquities?
The question relates to trade in cultural antiquities. The UNESCO Convention provides for export permits. The Bush administration was strong on requiring countries that got MOUs to provide export permits. Under the Obama administration, there was a backlog on that. I'm wondering if the Trump administration is going to facilitate lawful trade by encouraging MOUs to contain similar provisions.
You know, that's a question that's way out of my area of expertise. I know that we're negotiating these MOUs with countries in the MENA region as a way to help combat these grave national security risks that I outlined in my remarks. But whether then we would be using those for export permits, I would defer perhaps to colleagues in ECA who work on more of the day-to-day issues related to that.
Yeah, we'll get you an answer offline if you want to share your contact information. All right, thank you very much. Sir, would you like to stand up and take the microphone and say your name, please, and your question? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Eldred. Thank you so much to you all for your work and service to our country. And I ask this question very humbly. I was fortunate to be a Fulbright Scholar in Paris for the United States, and I understood truly for a glimpse about the work that the State Department does, but also how it's a bilateral, it's an exchange between the two countries. So I was wondering, within your own experiences, this is a question to you all, how is the State Department utilizing their programming and their infrastructure to tell the full narrative of the United States, to provide that other exchange, especially in terms of protecting our own cultural heritage, such as that of Native Americans within Paris's auction houses? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And sir, what is your name? Eldred? Okay, thanks, Eldred. Anyone like to start here?
We're all on like that. Well, we'll just, I guess, offer some of my experience most recently in Nepal. And building the narrative of what the United States is, I think, is kind of unique to each country. I mean, we obviously understand that while we're sitting here, when you're abroad, you're trying to fit into that dialogue, and so what you're going to present might differ from place to place. In a place like Nepal, which was an emerging democracy, we really talked a lot about our cultural heritage and our values, and not just sort of the static things of, monuments that were important to us, but what do democratic institutions look like, and multiculturalism, and things that are really conceptual as opposed to physical. We had a very concerted dialogue around those issues with Nepalis to kind of offer by example that there's no perfect definition of these things, that they're iterative over time, and sharing a little bit of our historical experience. That was a policy and strategy decision that we made as a team to look at what would help our relationship, what would benefit our relationship at that moment in Nepal's history, what would make the most sense? What could we call on in our own heritage? And in some ways, I think we just happened to have this very unique set of circumstances where Nepal's history was paralleling ours from about 200 years ago, and we used op-eds and social media. We used our Facebook account and speeches that I made and that others on the team made to bring up these themes again and again. And so we certainly presented, if you were an American sitting in the audience, perhaps a facile view of what the United States is, distilling sort of our culture, our history, and our values down to very, limited number of points. But it did serve our goals in trying to buttress and reinforce Nepal's own democratic aspirations. And I have to say it was actually a very powerful tool to be able to reflect, kind of our own image back.
Great. Ambassador Cormack?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with Elena's point on having worked in France. It's true that that kind of a long-term established relationship is very different than a newer relationship. We do a lot in Bosnia and Herzegovina through English language teaching, through exchange programs, to bring students back and forth, and also to bring students together from different groups within the country. I think one of the most important programs we have is in civic education. It goes by the name of Civitas, and it has trained hundreds of thousands of students over the last 23 years since the end of the war on how to begin to own the future of their own country, to teach those democratic principles that for us we're simply raised with automatically here in the United States of America, but in a country with a long history of socialism, they were not part of what was naturally transmitted. And so among many other projects, that's, I think, a very key one for us in trying to teach students civic activism and how to participate in their own democracy.
That's great.
And one thing I can say about the experience in East Asia, which I think has been replicated in other parts of the developing world from a previous administration, but very much embraced by the current administration, are these programs that allow young people to get together. There's an organization called YSEALI, the Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative, with over 100,000 kids. I mean, some of them are in their 20s and early 30s, but they've all grouped together in groupings that reflect their particular interests. Many of them brought back to the United States on visitor exchange programs, but a lot of the work is done in country, and a lot of it has to do with conveying to them, allowing them to discover really what it is about the United States that makes us unique and how that might relate to their own experience. But a lot of it's our effort to support, build up, strengthen, empower civil society through kind of younger people who have a real hunger in ASEAN, 660 million people, very young part of the world, real hunger to be part of their country's efforts to move forward. And so we've catalyzed that through YSEALI. There's, I think, an analog in Africa. There might be one in Latin America, but it's been very, very successful, leveraging social media, but all about representing kind of who we are and seeing where we and they can kind of lash up together.
That's great, wonderful. Thanks, Ambassador Davies. Ambassador Polashek, did you have any comment on
I
this?
would just second what colleagues said, and I've found these kind of youth-focused exchange programs, or even programs that aren't necessarily focused at youth, like the International Visitors Program when they're, for earlier professionals, so powerful. And particularly in the MENA region where there's so much change underway and young people are frustrated with corruption and poor governance and autocratic systems. And, in Algeria, the president there is in his early 80s, and there's this whole generation of young people who are so eager for change. And they might not necessarily like the policies of the United States, but boy, they love what we stand for in terms of a democratic society, in terms of the opportunity that comes with a meritocracy, with the equality. And I mean, are we a perfect society? No. But there's certainly a lot of people out there who would love to see many elements of U.S. society incorporated into their own countries. And these exchange programs, or teaching English, where we also are working on the kind of the civic values, or teaching young people even to think, because how much rote learning exists throughout the world, whereas maybe in an English language program you're actually asked to do a project where you have to come up with your own concept and pitch it to your group. It's just tremendously powerful.
That's great, thank you very much. By the way, Eldred, thank you for your question. For everyone in the audience, I would just want to say we've done the Fulbright Scholar Program for 72 years. That's in 155 countries. It's a pretty amazing program, and it's in all areas, including arts, STEM, etc. So people like yourselves are great ambassadors to go overseas. And lastly, I'll say, we talk about all these other exchange programs, like one is the International Visitor Leadership Program. That's been going on for 78 years. So along with cultural heritage, these are all bilateral exchanges where we can really share our culture with other countries, whether they're people or, in this case, MOUs or protecting cultural heritage. So thank you. Did I have any other questions from the crowd? I'll take one more last question because people are telling me we're running out of time. But if you could please say your name and your question. Thank you very much for your question, Jeannie.
And the Ambassador's Fund, it's amazing what she's done. I'm curious how the decision is made for how the Ambassador's funds are used. That is, how you develop the programs. Is that done in conjunction with the country, or just how is that done?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeannie, for your question. Ambassadors?
Sure.
Well, Ambassador Davies?
The basic answer is absolutely yes. I mean, we don't do things that the local governments are going to find objectionable, and we often work with them once these proposals are made. But these are proposals that come out of our interaction with cultural or social or other bodies in the country. It's often at the local level, because there's a whole ladder of these things. I mean, some are small grants worth less than $10,000, and some of them kind of go up from there. So it is very much an iterative process. There are people back in Washington who monitor and run the program from the end back here. And so we vet it all, we kind of negotiate it all. But what they call it the Ambassadors Fund, because we're the ones out at the cold face, as it were, in touch with these groups, looking for areas where it would make sense for us to be engaged, involved. And we seek out partners sometimes. Very often they come to us because they know about the program and they want a little bit of help preserving documents or cataloging oral histories or whatever it is. So it's not overly bureaucratized, which is one of the great advantages of it.
That's great. Ambassador Teplitz, did you want to?
I think another important piece of it too is that we're looking for sustainability and viability as well, and proposals we send forward. As Glenn suggests, we obviously get a lot more proposals than we would actually put forward for funding. And you want to make sure that whatever you're going to be investing in essentially is going to work. Do you have a good partner? We've seen a lot of great projects, perhaps not with the best partner. The moment is not ripe to do that, or for things that just aren't going to be sustainable or impactful over time. We had a particular project in Nepal that was kind of heartbreaking because we weren't able to bring it to fruition. Partnership not working out, and also it was to preserve a document collection. The building it was housed in, had a whole series of significant issues. So I think that's another important part of these things, is making sure that they're things that will last and have lasting impact and we can actually carry out for the money that we're putting on the table. Because there are sometimes very small sums, and so you don't want to all of a sudden open a can of worms that we can't do anything meaningful with.
That's great. Thank you, Ambassador Teplitz. Ambassador Cormack?
We've been blessed with this commission to preserve national monuments in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and all of our projects are decided jointly. And they're designed to try and help refugee communities return, whether that's building a bridge to reconnect them to trade and commerce, whether it's rebuilding churches in the Catholic, Orthodox, or Muslim communities to allow refugees to feel that they have a community that brings them back together again. So we're blessed with a great partner on the ground.
Thanks, Ambassador Cormack. And Ambassador Polishek, I'm going to give you the last comment.
Just to add any input, the experience in Algeria, tying lovely cultural projects back to what are our really kind of like hardcore national security interests. And so one of my predecessors, Ambassador Robert Ford, had started this lovely Ambassadors Fund project with a major Islamic university out in eastern Algeria that tied their amazing old historic archives into the U.S. Library of Congress. And now there are, digital links between the two institutions. And so it's, building interfaith dialogue and understanding. It's, cultivating the idea of an open, moderate, tolerant Islam, with the full support of the Algerian government. We've also looked at ways then to leverage these projects into other things that we can do. So there's a great project in Algeria in the hometown of St. Augustine. And there's this, amazing scholar, museum curator who's doing great work. And then we basically worked with him to start some youth programming so he could get young people interested in historic preservation and passing on his skills to the next generation, and then also kind of keeping these young people who are a little bit adrift and amiss, focused on an interesting goal. So there are huge multiplier effects to every single thing that we do in this realm.
That's great. Well, I want to say thank you to all of our 4 ambassadors, and I want to say thank you to each one of you. We've had an amazing 2-day conference here, and it couldn't have been achieved if it wasn't for the participation of each one of you and also the organizers. I think that this panel clearly illustrates very effectively the role that cultural heritage has as far as our foreign policy, achieving our foreign policy objectives. So at this time, I just want to say thank you to each one of you. We've got a few things I want to let you know. One is we're going to have a nice light reception outside at the Schumer Hall. And then 2, I'm going to ask the ambassadors to stay on stage and we'll take a photo. But let's just give them a big round of applause again. also just want to say that as the chair of the coordinating committee, I'm really proud of what we've achieved here. This is incredible, and you know, this is very illuminating. Sometimes you read things, but now, you know, you've been part of it, and even the 3 working groups that you've been working so hard, and this is just a real testament to the public-private partnership that we have. So again, thank you, and I look forward to saying hi to you out in the reception, and thanks for coming. Thank you.